Gregory, are you here?
Yes, I am, Kate. Hello.
Okay. Sorry, I was giving you the word, but I guess it didn't get translated yet. But I am done with the organizational part. So please step in and introduce our speakers for today.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
I'm
you,
so
Kate.
sorry, Greg. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're still
Sure.
trying to help Jen get that translation. Or do you have it, Jen? No.
No, but keep going. We'll solve on my end.
Okay, I will step in. Okay, Jen, so have you found the interpretation button? No, okay. It can look either like a little planet on the menu, or if you don't have it, then please click on three dots as more. Yeah, and there should be a line that is called interpretation. Do you see it?
All right, keep going. I think we got us off. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you click on the interpretation, there will be English channel. Okay. Do you see it? It's all right. It's all right. You see it. Okay, perfect.
Oh,
I'm
well,
good.
thank you.
Keep going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Gregory Leskin. I'm a program director for the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, Military and Veteran Families Program. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today for another outstanding training webinar. And on behalf of our US-based planning team, Dr. Koza, Dr. Ogle, we want to thank you for joining us today, and we want to introduce our esteemed presenters today. Let me just give a little bit of background. This presentation is from the Education Development Center and will focus on suicide prevention for youth with special emphasis to the contextual realities and approaches available during wartime. The speakers will discuss protective factors that will bolster mental resilience, mitigate suicide risk, and examine warning signs for early intervention among youth. The presentation will also highlight and explore effective brief interventions aimed at suicide crisis management and support. Attendees will learn about the biological foundations of stress and gain insights into physiological mechanisms underpinning stress and trauma. An overview of select practical techniques, including breathing techniques, tools for managing stress, and promoting emotional well-being will be spotlighted. Our three presenters today, we welcome Dr. Heidi Carr, is the Education Development Center's Distinguished Scholar, Mental Health, Trauma, and Violence Initiatives. Dr. Carr is a licensed clinical psychologist and global mental health expert, and she provides leadership to domestic and international work focused on mental health, trauma, and violence. I will drop the rest of Dr. Carter's bio in the chat in a moment. I also want to introduce Jennifer Myers, is a mental health professional, consultant, trainer, advocate, who has worked to create change in systems throughout her career. Myers, Jennifer, is currently the Associate Director for Trauma Recovery, Mental Health Promotion, and Violence Prevention Team, and a clinical suicide expert. Thank you, Jennifer. Our third presenter is Lolita Madison. Ms. Madison is a mental health professional, trainer, and expert in the science of trauma, the neurological models of emotion regulation, and mindfulness-based treatments for post-traumatic stress. Lolita is currently a mental health project director for the Trauma Recovery, Mental Health Promotion, and Violence Prevention team. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Carr.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be with all of you today, the NPA members. Lilita, Jen, and I are really excited to offer 2 presentations in the same format that you all have been using for these webinars, with a lot of time for interaction and discussion. And we look forward to hearing and learning from each of you. I'm going to start with just a few bits of overview. Just very quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with the Education Development Center, we're a large global nonprofit. We work across the world. We work across the lifespan and do kind of everything from very localized, community-based interventions, development and training, all the way up to national, international policy creation, and have quite a bit of emphasis on youth-focused approaches, interventions, and support. We do a lot of education and workforce development for youth living in places that are emerging from crisis or conflict. So for youth who haven't been in school for years, many times, we are one of those kind of experts at going in and doing accelerated education and workforce development to bring youth up to where they need to be, both academically, but also in terms of social emotional learning skills, connecting skills, ability to start their own business in places where organized job opportunities are minimal. So we do a lot of that work. We do quite a bit of work in mental health, psychosocial support, and social emotional learning across different arenas. We do caregiver support, home visiting interventions for really vulnerable families, working with the family as a unit. And we do a lot of health system and mental health system capacity building and development. Again, we work across the world. This is just a snapshot of many of the places we work or have recently worked. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the types of work we do. That's not the focus, but just again, if anyone's interested in specific areas of suicide prevention, or working within health systems to close the gaps in suicide care, or intervention development, in teaching youth mental health skills, kind of when there aren't enough of us clinicians out there, we really believe we need to give more tools to youth to be able to help themselves in some of these cases. And always happy to come back if anyone's interested in talking more about any of these areas, including violence prevention, domestic violence, family violence kinds of things. We have expertise in that too, but we couldn't pack it all in today, unfortunately. So again, we're going to start with our first presentation. We're going to talk about background a little bit of mental health during war, some of the kind of key principles we know are so important to keep in mind. We're going to go into warning signs and screening for suicide risk, and then we're going to open it up for discussion, questions and answers. And then we'll go into our second presentation, which is much more focused on practical, brief interventions that you can use with your clients, with your patients, and that are appropriate for the types of trauma and levels of stress that youth are facing during wartime. Again, you all are experts in these areas as well, so really look forward to learning from you. Please, please don't hold back and help us learn from you as well. So if we could, I'd like to just start with a quick poll and ask everyone to kind of type into the chat. This is to help us when we get to the Q&A. Actually, if you can just let us know what is the majority of your clinical time going toward? Are you all doing more kind of individual child and youth mental health treatment? Are you doing a lot of groups right now? Is it more, do you think, slanted towards psychosocial support in terms of the needs, the gravity of the situation? Are you doing a lot of parenting work or coaching with caregivers? Are you doing adult-focused treatment? That would really help us kind of frame our context for who's on the call with us today. So if you don't mind just helping us understand your frame and context, that would be wonderful. Okay. and keep on going. I'm just going to keep going in the interest of time, but please don't stop answering. All right, so just to get into a little bit of background of the psychological needs of children.
Sorry, can you please move back a little bit, because the interpreter was interpreting all the
Oh,
six
so sorry.
areas.
Yes.
Don't
Yes,
worry.
my apologies.
Sorry, we're done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So just a little bit of context. I'm sure many of you know this, but my attempt here is to take all the best evidence we have, what we know works in terms of war, what is practical to keep in mind. So in terms of supporting children and adolescents during wartime, we know that obviously the problems or challenges are going to be different for younger children versus older youth, right? From evidence from the Ukraine that's come out this year, some qualitative research has kind of looked into this area, and it's very clear that we're seeing children between kind of 10 to 14 years of age are very, as we would assume, focused on more of the daily situation. So they're focused on peer relationships. They're focused on experiences they're having day to day. They're focused on how to play, how they can find situations that are bringing them joy and that are giving them kind of a stress-free periods. Whereas older adolescents are, as you would expect, much more focused on their futures and wondering, if we're not in school, what's going to happen in terms of how we build a life, our job prospects. Based on the reality of identity formation, older youth are also feeling that loss, grieving that separation from their home, from their communities at a higher level than younger children. That just goes with kind of the cognitive development and identity formation reality. And so there's going to be much more focus on, what have I lost? How can I get home? I want to be home in the older youth. But even despite differences based on age, there are common needs across all children and youth during war. Social connection, really deep social connection, we know is key. Emotional awareness, being able to label, what is the distress I'm feeling? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it grief? Right? And knowing how to regulate those distressing emotions. We know that that's key as psychologists. The ability to identify a sense of control. So this is a huge one that we sometimes miss out on in these cases as clinicians. If we go back to kind of what's the core of trauma-related disorders, we know that there is this sense of being out of control, of not having control in areas of your life. And so finding areas of mastery, right, where young people feel they have some control, or they're very good at something, or they can affect some kind of change, however small that might be in their daily life, is incredibly important to preventing trauma-related disorders from taking hold. So working with youth to identify those places they do have control and that they are strong in, and that they can affect change. It's really important. Social connection, we know it's important as psychologists, but sometimes we forget that we have to do step-by-step instruction about how to deepen social connections, both for the parents and caregivers, but also for young people, right? So encouraging new relationships to be formed for youth who are displaced, but also helping them step through what are the steps to getting there is really important, especially when someone is completely out of their comfort zone and is overloaded in terms of stress and cognitive load. And finally, understanding that balance between psychosocial support and when that young person actually needs something more significant, needs to be transitioned into more mental health care. Of course, there's the question of if it's available and how it's available and by whom, but being able to be really clear, that's something that psychologists bring in particular, right? That psychosocial support is not enough for this group or for this person, and we need to do something more intense. When we think about core mental health disorder prevention tips, right? There are, again, boiling down what we know, what is most important to preventing mental health issues, right? And also thinking, how do we guide? And I'm sure you all are doing this, but how do we guide the caregivers in really clear, practical ways to be able to do this for their households, for their families, the youth in their orbit? In terms of preventing mental health conditions after really stressful situations after war, going back to the cognitive behavioral therapy, foundation, flexible thinking, right? Non-extreme, non-rigid. So helping caregivers understand, if their child says there's no hope, like this will never end, something really healing and simple that doesn't take a lot of time for that caregiver to reframe that and say, actually, there is hope. Think about this, think about that. This will end at some point, and look at what we have and what do you think we can do? Trying to continuously build that flexible thinking so that rigidity does not take hold, right? So even in small ways, trying to just poke holes in that rigid extreme thinking that's very common to come up in situations where we're feeling hopeless and the cognitive load has gotten so burdensome. We know for trauma-related disorders, the #1 biggest predictor of who will develop PTSD or another trauma-related disorder is if the young person cannot disclose and does not get the right kind of reaction when they disclose. So being able to teach these caregivers, parents, being able to help youth disclose their trauma to someone who is going to give them a supportive, non-judgmental, void of blame response is key to preventing further trauma-related reactions. And in terms of suicide, and we're going to get into much more of this in a little bit, future orientation, continuously helping youth who already have kind of a cognitive limitation with this idea of time horizon, with this idea of thinking, oh, there is a future. What's happening right now doesn't necessarily dictate what's happening to me 3 years from now or 5 years from now. There are things that are coming that I don't know. There are other chapters. It's hard for young people to think about based on their cognitive development. So continuously reorienting them to the future, excuse me, to hopeful, to feeling hope, and also to feeling responsible to their social circle. Social responsibility is an incredible protective factor for suicide. Feeling that people are counting on you and need you to be around. So these are some of those very basic things that we can do with pretty low effort. It doesn't take so much time to teach these kinds of things. And finally, one last note from me, and I'll hand it over to Lilita, is we're talking to you today about how to help youth, how to support your clients, how to support the young people of your country. But we all know burnout and vicarious trauma makes us less affected as clinical supports. And that is not our fault. That is just the reality of what happens when we are supporting people in so much distress, and so many people. A reminder here, all of the techniques that we're teaching you today, you can use yourself. I know this is not necessarily something new, but it's a reminder that you have to take care of yourselves. You also have families. You also are living through the same kinds of personal stressors of war. And so please try to remind each other of that as a community, and try to figure out how to build in one or two very simple strategies to help your nervous system calm, to help kind of ward against burnout and vicarious trauma. And at this point, I'll hand it over to Lilith.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I just wanted to add that reminder. So taking those words, nervous system and helping your nervous system, and this idea that yes, we are serving children and teenagers, and at the same time, there's the invitation for us also to do some work and self-care for ourselves. One of the aspects that we wanted to bring to our conversation with all of you colleagues today is the importance of highlighting the biological foundations of stress as we work in a preventative way with kids and teens. Next slide, please. And as a starting point, so here we have an image of the autonomic nervous system. As experts in this field, I imagine that all of us are familiar with those innate systems of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic response in the nervous system. And what I wanted to highlight is the why of why is this particular information important for us to highlight and teach as we work with kids and teens around trauma and prevention and wellness. So I don't know what it was like for all of you, but I know that for myself, when I was age 5 or age 8, I had not yet had science or biology courses that I had in school later on. And so when I had reactions in my body, when I was nervous or worried, I didn't yet have a framework or an understanding of what was happening. And the idea for us to make sure that we bring this information even to a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old can be really, really transformative for them to normalize and understand what's happening in the body, to say, oh my goodness, the alarm in my body is going off right now, right? To be able to have a language and a framework around that. The other thing that can be extremely empowering, Heidi talked about this question of what can we do to empower, right? What can we do to help support kids and teens to have some sort of sense of control about, despite everything happening in their external environment, that maybe there's one thing that they can practice or do or act on that creates some relief from themselves, right? And so through this sort of education, we're also creating the invitation for kids and teens to start paying attention to that internal system of, ooh, my body's telling me that I'm in danger. And as I'm sharing this reminder with all of you, and many of you may already be highlighting this in your work, whether it's in groups or one-on-one consultations, courses that you might be teaching, I'll come back to the reminder that this is also so vital for us to recognize in ourselves, right? When is our body giving us the signal that there is something activating, when there is stress, or our body's giving us a danger signal? Okay, next slide, please. And so, along this conversation of paying attention to our biology and physiology, there are some foundational practices, and we'll actually get to experience some of those later on today. Breath and movement, that we know these are evidence-based practices where the science show us there are clear and defined benefits. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the list of all the benefits. You all see the list in front of you, ranging from a decrease in heart rate when we take those soft and gentle belly breaths and activate the vagus nerve, all the way to improved sleep. Okay? But I wanted us to also pause as part of this particular framework and just highlight, why is teaching regulation important? Why is this toolbox? How and why can it be transformational for, again, that 9-year-old or that 16-year-old? And we all know that one of the most important things that happens when we experience the stress response is that the prefrontal cortex shuts down. And we know that that impacts our ability to make decisions, to focus, to concentrate. We know that that might even impact our ability to make social connections, be present with, just and aware of what's going on in our environment. So part of this highlight and the importance of just being aware of this toolbox is that so that we can offer kids and teens these portable, free, diverse, effective strategies where they might notice that just through 10 belly breaths, there's a little bit of muscle relaxation in their shoulders, or through some stretching, or perhaps some even shaking, that something shifted where maybe they released a little bit of the fatigue or tiredness that they had, right? So I know that there's so much more. I'm excited to practice and give you a little practical, experiential a little bit later on. But really, I'm going to pause right now and in a moment hand the baton to my colleague Jen, who's going to transition us and really speak about the protective factors and the warning signs for suicide prevention. So we'll park these practices in the parking lot, knowing that we'll be able to experience them a little bit later.
Thank you, Lilita. I'm going to move us further into suicide prevention today and talk more about the warning signs, talk about tools for screening, and not a full assessment of suicide risk, but an initial ideas to move forward with that. We won't have time to go through a full assessment of suicide risk. And then strategies to support within the context for you all. And I ask that there will be times that share your expertise, right? So we'll get into that, into the discussion to make this more specific for all of you and apply it in your situations. I know that talking about suicide can be hard. I do this work because I've lost a client to suicide, because my mom has gone through her own suicidal crisis. And I'm so fortunate to still have her here today. And because I myself have struggled with suicidal thoughts. And I know that any one of us at any given time, no matter how much of an expert helper we are, we might need some support. So I have a couple asks before we move forward. Is one, to ask if you need to talk to someone, that you do so. You can ask, reach out to someone in your area and talk to someone. If you need anything from us, you let us know. My other ask is, whenever we talk about suicide prevention, sometimes people look back and kind of do the should've, would've, could've, which can really hurt. So if you're looking back on something that's really hard for you, I suggest some self-compassion. I like to just touch my heart and say, ouch, that hurts. And then connect and know that you're not alone in any hurt and you have people who are here for you. And then I also ask that, we know that we can't cover as much as possible. So please make this as applicable to you as possible in the discussion. I'm going to move us forward here and take a moment to ground. Take a moment to do what Lilita just discussed. So when I say grounding, just an opportunity to connect with the world around us, because talking about suicide can be hard. So if you'd like, you can just take a deep breath and just notice 3 colors in your world. They can be colors on the screen. It can just be something that's on your space in front of you. You might notice like, oh, it's a deeper yellow than what I initially thought. Just center your breath, notice a few colors, and know that this type of simple practice can even help someone who's thinking about suicide. Because what we know about the suicidal mind is it can get tunnel visioned. It's called cognitive constriction, closed in, and hard to see what else is going on around us. And just by doing practices that help us see the world around us, even if it's a challenging world, just to notice, I didn't realize that that blue was so rich in my home or in my world around me. So moving to our next slide here, I'd like to get into some definitions, but also how it applies to the context. So, Heidi, if we can move to the protective factors slide. So what we'd like to talk about when we talk about suicide risk, to make this in some way potentially feel oversimplified but easily applicable, is anytime someone's at risk for suicide, whether an individual or a group, what we would like to do is increase protections, increase protective factors, decrease risk factors, and notice warning signs. So what are protective factors? They're things that decrease the likelihood that that person will develop whatever that is, the problem. So in this situation, suicidal thinking or even suicidal behaviors. You heard Heidi mention earlier the importance of social connectedness. Belongingness and connectedness are necessary for the will to live. And so if we can increase any type of connection, even if you don't know someone, just looking another person in the eye, even in the most intense pain, can help protect against suicide. If we move to the next slide here, we have a list of just common protective factors that can include what you all provide to people. Research has shown us that just accessing mental health care can decrease suicide risk, improving someone's problem-solving skills. And this might be really focusing on the problem at hand, not every problem around. Strong spiritual beliefs. Now, it's not our role as mental health professionals to make someone believe something, but if we can help add some energy and fuel, if we can help them to ignite spiritual beliefs that were there and might be struggling in the current situation, that can really help. We mentioned a sense of belonging and connectedness, healthy and adaptive coping skills, which I know can be very hard when things are at their worst. But sometimes just saying, I need to take a deep breath, can be all we need to do for that intense emotional crisis wave that's coming through. A sense of hope and feeling as if one's life has a purpose. That purpose doesn't have to be 20 years from now. That purpose can be the next 5 minutes. So if we move to the next slide, we'll talk more about warning signs. And warning signs are things that we look for, something that tells us in that person's verbal or written communication that may indicate that they're at more immediate or serious risk. Now, of course, warning signs are individualized and contextualized to the situation. So if we move to the next slide here, I've listed a few that a couple of these tend to stand out across most humans. If a person's talking about suicide, many times we miss it, but it's a warning sign. Feeling significant hopelessness, saying nothing's going to get any better. I can't see a light at the end of this tunnel. Being a burden to others. Feeling as if like I can't do enough to help my country, my family, with my community, or maybe I messed something up. I feel like I made a mistake and I feel like I'm a burden. It could be shame, humiliation, maybe expressing no reason to live, feeling trapped as if there's no way out. And as mental health professionals, it's our job to help people see the other ways out because their brain might be stuck. I can see nothing else to do. And our job is to help them see those other options without doing it in an oversimplified way, like giving just one answer, one line. Suicide also can happen when someone's experiencing unbearable psychological pain. So I just want to note about the burdensomeness here. We talked about protective factors. If you can help someone see that their death, if they were to die by their own hands, that's actually increasing the burden of on their family or others, then you can decrease their risk. Basically, you help them know that I don't want to be a burden to others. My life is more valuable, even if I feel like I can't provide enough, if I can't get food or whatever it might be. If we move to the next slide here, we can talk more about just some additional things that I might reference today. A precipitating event might be the person seems like they're doing really well, and that one thing happens, that breakup, that person leaves them and separates them, and that feels like it's a trigger, something that contributes to suicide risk. When I use the words at risk, I'm talking about someone who might be at higher risk for suicide based on the risk factors in their life or the things occurring for them. If we move to the next slide here, I'd like to talk about a screening tool. It's called the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale that has been translated into almost like 65 languages, just not Ukrainian yet. So hopefully it can be in this presentation slide though. But what we do is this is a screening tool, 6 questions that can help us identify suicide risk. The first one, we make sure, well, first we make sure we ask questions 1 and 2. Have you wished you were dead? Wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? You can use this with youth also, usually to about 12. This screening tool, anything younger than 12, it's up to your clinical judgment based on their development. So have you wished you were dead? Wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Ask the next question too. Have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? No matter what the answer is to 1, you ask 1 and 2 if you notice warning signs of suicide risk. In this screening tool, if anyone says yes to questions 1 or 2, then we go further into this. How have you been thinking of, or have you been thinking about how you might do this? The 4th question, have you had these thoughts and had some intention upon acting on them? And the 5th is, have you started to work out or worked out the details of how to kill yourself? Do you intend to carry out this plan? Now notice sometimes our youth, if you say, do you have a plan for something? The youth might say, I don't know what I'm doing in the next hour. So sometimes when we talk about assessing or screening for suicide risk, we ask, do you have a plan? That 5th question asks us, do you have a plan, without asking for the word plan until a little further. Have you started to work it out? Have you started to work out the details? So if you ask a youth, have you started to work out if you've started to work out the details to do something, that might help you get more information from someone who maybe isn't doesn't quite fully have a plan yet. And then you always ask the sixth question, helps us know past risk. Have you done anything, started to do anything, or prepared to do anything to end your life? Anyone who's attempted suicide before, prepared, or started to do so is at greater risk. So you'll notice the coloring on this. If someone answers yes to 1 or 2, you see like a yellow category where they might be at risk, but lower risk. 3, you start seeing it get a higher risk. Anything that's answers yes to questions 4, 5, or 6, with 6 being in the past 3 months, would be at that higher risk. So we really need to make sure that we ask questions 1, 2, and 6 with every person. We can skip 3, 4, and 5 if they say no to 1 and 2. So no, this is a screening tool, not a full assessment tool. Of course, suicide risk assessment is much deeper than 6 questions, but I'm going to pause here for us to discuss and apply. Greg, would you like to walk us through this?
Thank you, Jen. Well, we do want to pause for a moment to reflect and share. I'm going to put some questions in the chat. Hopefully that's translated accurately. The question should say, what is resonating for you? Also, how are you practicing your own well-being right now? Just a moment to stop and reflect on the information we've received in the first part of today's presentation, to think about how the focus might have been on yourself, on your family, on your community, on your clients or patients, to think about what has been going through your mind as you've been hearing about trauma and suicide as it relates to children at war, and to ask if anyone would like to take their selves off mute or chat your responses now.
Great translation in the chat, Greg.
Yeah. I would add that during this period of self-reflection, that if there are thoughts that you are having about ways that you might practice well-being, or even check in with a colleague or a family member or a friend that you think about, that you make a note to reach out, or you make a note of some self well-being practice that you'd like to put into your daily routine, and that you try to practice that and put that into effect, the things that you're learning today. Would anyone else like to share any of the information that's resonating for you now?
Колеги, можете залишати. Ой, вибачте, можете залишати у чаті, якщо вам не дуже зручно говорити, можете залишати свої відповіді у чаті. Я постараюсь швиденько перекласти їх англійською для наших лекторок і модератора. Або ви можете підняти руку і поділитися з усіма, знаєте, використати цю можливість для такого єднання і такий bonding experience, не знаю, як це перекласти, але да, що ви можете також це зробити особисто, будь ласка, не якщо ви хочете поділитися, то це може бути комусь дуже важливо почути сьогодні.
I see the question in the chat about using some of these questions and screening tools, but also feeling like you need to be careful that you don't want to put the idea of suicide into someone's mind. You don't want to make them at greater risk with those questions. So I'd like to say that my understanding of the research first is that if someone is at risk for suicide, they will appreciate the questions. They're not likely to bring it up completely on their own. And if someone is not thinking about suicide, the question does not make them think about it. In fact, in my experience, if someone is not thinking about suicide, what they will say usually is their protected factors, why they're not thinking about suicide. So they might say something like, yes, things are really hard, but I love my family so much, I could never do that. Oh no. So what we know is that just asking won't make someone think about it. Likely will lead to relief for the person who is thinking about it. I will say that whenever you're working with younger people, so like 12 and under, or maybe, that you always have to make your judgment on what's best for someone's age and cognitive development about how you ask certain questions, and even do they even understand terms like death or kill in that way. Now, obviously, in your context, they likely very much do understand those terms, but that is just another thing to think about, is the age appropriateness for younger children at times. And there may be other ways to ask some of those questions that are very specific to the person you're talking to. Have you had thoughts of wishing you could be with and naming someone who's died? That's a very hard thing to ask because obviously someone's grieving an intense loss. Yet that's a very specific way for someone to get that, bring that up. You just need to know, are they saying, I wish they would come back and be here and I wish they could be here? Or do I wish I could be with them and no longer alive? And that's where those clinical skills in the interviewing that all of you have would come in. Heidi, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I'll add to a majority of my clinical experience is with veterans and military personnel. And I will say that, so this kind of goes to the first question, also the next question in the chat. I have been amazed to see that those sessions where I'm openly bringing up suicide with vets and with active duty military personnel are sometimes some of the most cathartic healing sessions. And I think this is clinical experience. Research backs it, but this is my own clinical experience. I think it's for two reasons. One, there's such a secrecy. There's so much stigma about suicide. And I think especially for people who've been in war, who've been in situations where they're trying to stay alive from kind of the hands of other people, there's kind of this whole other added layer of shame of this idea of thinking about ending your life yourself. And so being able to bring that out and showing that you have complete empathy and you're not afraid of the fact that they're thinking this, and that there's nothing wrong with them as a person for thinking it, I think that's very healing. And I've seen that time and time again. So there's this element of not having to keep the secret and of being accepted, that's healing. And you can see that relief in a way, and it takes the power away in much of the case, right? So I've seen the opposite, and I completely understand the fear. I understand the question where it comes from. I think all of us have that, but having done it time and time again, I've never felt that there was increased risk. I've always felt this kind of decreased intensity around it. but would love to hear other people's experiences as well. And just to the next question about if this Columbia screen is appropriate for deployed military, absolutely. And Jen's answering that too. It has been used with active duty military populations and shown to be effective as well. But welcome other people's experiences in this.
I think I see a question that's about, do I keep going if the first two questions are no in the screening tool? And the way the tool is developed, which is a little confusing, is to ask the first question, the second question, and the sixth question of everyone. So that first question, have you wished you were dead, wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Second question, have you actually had any thoughts about killing yourself? If you get no there at all, you actually aren't even in the yellow necessarily, although something led you to ask. So you might be seeing some warning signs. So that person's not at risk as much. If 1 or 2 is in the negative. You still want to ask question 6, because let's say the person is not thinking about suicide right now, but in the past few months or in their lifetime, maybe they sat there and started to take their life, maybe even just a month ago. That would tell you they are really high risk, even if their thoughts are not about suicide right now. And you may need to work with them on the next things that we'll be talking about, right? Having a good plan for if suicidal thoughts were to come up again.
I'm also seeing a question about building rapport before bringing up the topic of suicide. I could perhaps start by sharing a couple of strategies that I implement, and I would love actually to hear from all of you. I'm aware of the wisdom in this room. One of the things that I do very, very, very consistently is really the motto or theme of everything's welcome in this space. And I reiterate that time and time again. Mistakes are welcome. Stressful thoughts are welcome. So again, going back to, for me, really building the safety, clinical safety as a way to facilitate that.
Well, thank you so much for the rich discussion. We'll return to some more discussion shortly, but let's return to the presentation style. And I'm going to hand things back to Dr. Carr to lead us back into the presentation. Thank you. We'll continue to monitor the chat as well.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so we're going to move into the evidence-based brief interventions now. That was kind of our overview, context setting, a little bit about screening for suicide. One more poll. Again, this is just to help us know what is most important to you all to cover in our discussion. Are any of these topics particularly important? I know that from some conversations with Greg, there have been some questions in terms of the weapons, you know, how you deal with youth who have weapons to protect themselves and how that relates to suicide risk. Stigma about talking about suicide or mental health in general, we know is high everywhere, unfortunately. So wondering if that's a big issue that you all face right now. And then clinician self-care, or if there's something else that you're really hoping for today. Please let us know that in the chat, so that we don't leave here before we address those issues. And Kate, just let me know when to move on, please.
Dear colleagues, I apologize. That is me from another device. Just letting you know that my computer has glitched a little bit, but I see that in the chat there are a lot of choices of option number 3 as of clinician self-care.
Yes. Thank you, Kate. Yes, that speaks volumes, everyone. We will talk a little bit more about that, and also happy to come back and do, a full webinar on just that, if that's helpful as well. Okay, so we're going to move on. Handing over to Jen.
Yes, and so the presentation slides take us further into these specific strategies we can use with youth and adults, elderly. And I also, since I know many people commented on the self-care, I just want to say something for myself. As someone who was working as really the expert in the places I was working regarding those at risk for suicide. So my colleagues would ask my consultation on how to handle some of the most high-risk situations. I have a couple things I would do. And one is to remember that no person's life is completely in my hands, that there are so many people involved. And if I have reached a point where I've kept something so secret that someone's high risk is just between me and them, I'm not supporting myself, but I'm also not supporting them. A person needs connectedness, they need support, and they have that in a lot of ways in their life, even if it's just to say, look at the moon. That person who is possibly fighting for you, or maybe even fled the country, is still under that same moon and has that support too. The other thing I do is if I'm very concerned, I make sure that if I can consult with someone, I'm not doing things by myself as much as possible, even if I use a crisis service for that consultation. So I can say, and I say to the person, your life matters so much that I would like one brain, or not just one brain. I would like to add more than one brain to help you through this and to make sure I've thought of everything. And then I can talk to someone else and ask them to be a part of that discussion if need be. And this is the next thing I do here, which is exactly what we're going to move into, is know what might help. What does the research say might help? And how can I customize, knowing that the research has not researched every scenario or every person or situation? So what we'll cover here is called crisis response planning in the research or its formal term. I will say, for the context you have, crisis does not always equal suicidal thoughts, correct? So that means you need to name it something else with someone that you're working with, if you want this to be just for suicide. But it can also be about emotional crises. And what is this that we're talking through? It's a memory aid to help with early identification of emotional crises for the individual. How can they know they're at greatest risk? It's a tool to manage those emotional crises in the acute moment when it feels most intense. It's personalized. It helps with problem solving, one of those protective factors. You collaboratively develop it, meaning you don't tell someone what's going to support them the most in crisis. I had a client tell me that thinking about how elephants connect, he'd seen it on a documentary, and that's what helped him when he was in a suicidal crisis. I would never have thought of that myself. So we need to have people share those things that might be very unique, that help them realize that even elephants can connect. I can too. And it's, contextualized, right? Like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be called a crisis response plan. So if we move into the next piece here, Heidi, the next slide, I'd like to cover, what is this? What do you do in a crisis response plan? So the warning signs here are not the warning signs I mentioned earlier. In fact, I wish it was called something different here. This is what I would say to a client. I would say, when do you know that you're in an emotional crisis? Maybe when do you feel emotionally on fire? What are the situations you're most likely to think about suicide? I went to get food for my family, and I'm the protector in my family, and I can't get it. And I feel like I'm a failure. That's a warning sign that I might think about suicide. Or even in everything that's happening, I just keep arguing with my loved ones so much, and I just feel like I keep messing it up. Any argument might be a warning sign. Then what are these self-management strategies? So self-management strategies being, what can I do on my own? And I would encourage these to be things you can do on your own, anywhere, without anything. So what I mean by that is, I mentioned looking at the moon. Well, sometimes there's a sun that's out, right? Our breath is here with us. What can I have with me anywhere at any time, if at all possible? Maybe I can create something I even carry with me and put in my pocket. What are my reasons for living? What keeps me going even when things are the hardest? And this is how you can ask someone, what keeps you going? Because what we know about the suicidal mind is, ask some of the most experts in suicide prevention and suicidology, and they will say that most people, they would actually say all, are not 100% set on dying. There's part of them wants to live and part of them wants to die. It's ambivalence. And as a mental health professional, it's our job to address both. The part that wants to die and not hurry up to get to the part that wants to live because we're anxious for living, and also get to the part that wants to live and keep that going even in the toughest times. Social support, which can be social support that through technologies, through connections, WhatsApp, other types of resources there. It can be who's around me. And like I mentioned before, it might be even just looking someone in the eye, even if they're an absolute stranger. And then where are those crisis and professional assistance? And oftentimes you teach someone to go through this kind of in an order in some way, kind of start with what can I do that helps me get through that crisis? And you can also teach someone when maybe the crisis is so intense, it is the absolute worst thing they could imagine in their life. And that is that precipitating thing that means they just need to go straight to crisis or professional assistance or to someone else. And maybe there's 1, 2, or 3 people in their life that they can create a bit of a code word with that says, Heidi, I need some of your time. If I said, Heidi, I need some of your time, she might say, I'm in the middle of a Ukraine presentation, if I was her close friend. And maybe I can find a way to say to her, Heidi, code word, this is very important to me. I need if I say a certain word to her. If we move forward, you can see an example of how this was created from Craig Bryan. So this is one of his tools that he used, where the warning sign, when the person is pacing around, when they feel irritable, when they're thinking it will never get better. In this situation, this was developed in the US context, this example, but they could go for a walk, watch a Friends episode, a TV show, play with their dog. These are things they could do. But then their reasons for living. Think about my kids. Go back and think about my kids and Christmas Day and other things. Who can I reach out to in this situation? It was their mom or Jennifer. And then what are those key numbers that they can go to? The numbers on here have been changed, so we're not putting anyone's phone number out there, but the key things they would go to, both numbers they could call, maybe they could text, chat lines you could reach out to, but also, can I just physically go somewhere, go to a hospital or a crisis center? If we move to the next slide, one of the other brief interventions here, which I also find helps my self-care if I do this, is to build a hope kit. And a hope kit can be physical items. It can also be on a cell phone, or it can just be in your memory if you need to. If people are moving around so much, it's hard to carry something or have around. But what are these things? They're used to identify and reinforce reasons for living. It's a brief intervention that can, based on cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that's where those thoughts for reasons for living can be increased. It can increase hopefulness in the moment and for the future, not meant to solve every problem in the world, and can refocus those negative thinking patterns. So if we think about what's a hope kit, if we move to the next slide here, you'll see that what goes in a hope kit are your reasons for living. Heidi, I didn't see the slide move. If you could do that for me, that would be great. Thank you. Reminders of previous successes and positive life experiences. Current coping resources. So if Heidi is my support, then I can have, her number or a photo of something fun we've done together. Maybe affirmations of worth. Even if there are days that I struggle to find food for my family, they know I love them and care about them. And that matters so much. That could, a brief version of that could go in the hope box. Spiritual items, whether it's a cross, a verse, other images that help people. Photos, like I said, you can store it in your phone. You can set a reminder, or you can have that photo show up at certain times to look at it and remember. Letters, cards, or texts or emails. I try to keep one line somebody sent to me, and that can help. Maybe other success documents, special quotes or poems. For me, as a mindfulness mentor, is a good friend of mine that said, there's an arising of love that can hold it all. And I just hold on to that. That's my quote I go to. Art, jewelry, music, anything at all that helps someone experience some hope. And how do you ask for this? Go work with someone to say, can you think of a time when a family member helped you in the past? When a friend was really helpful? Tell me at a time someone you didn't know well did something special. A doctor, a stranger, someone at the store. Pick a situation when you did something that made someone feel more hopeful. Can you describe a time in your life you felt proud of yourself? If you were to give me a photograph of hope, what would it look like? And I like to, if it's at all possible, if there's any concerns about firearms and suicide risk, I like to see, can you connect these things together? Can someone tape a photo of hope to their, firearms so they don't use it for themselves? Or can they remember one sentence that says, protecting my family is my biggest important thing, and therefore I have this for protection, not to use on myself. Please help me keep up with the chat here and there if we need to, Heidi and Melissa, but I'll just move us forward real quick and talk about some of these distress tolerance skills and the difference with distress tolerance skills that most of you might know, very based in dialectical behavior therapy. The difference between these and what I might think of as the traditional way we use coping skills is distress tolerance skills help us ride the most intense things and just cope, just tolerate. This is really hard, but don't cope, solve the issue, so it's not necessarily doing something here. So paced breathing. And can you just extend your exhale longer than your inhale, as if you're blowing out a candle? Just what's opposite action? Can you work with someone at risk for suicide? It says, I know you don't want to call or see anybody. I need you to see, can you possibly connect with one person a day? Even if it's just a quick text or just to look someone in the eye or just to say hello more often. Cold water. Splashing cold water on your face. I feel so intense. Can I just use cold water or hold on to or take a drink? Grounding, we talked about that. We used an exercise for that. There are many other grounding activities. And then distractions. So that second thing on the crisis plan can be, what can I do to cope? Thinking about just, even if it's just playing a quick game, even in my head. So the next slide here, I'll just move forward and I'll just mention, have an emotional crisis plan for everywhere. So I've mentioned most of this, but basically help someone develop my 3 steps. I'm gonna use cold water, get a drink if I can, have one sentence I tell myself and look someone in the eye, and then make no major decisions for 24 hours. Go ahead, Heidi, we can move to the next slide and I'll just say one thing and get us back to our discussion if at all possible. But when you think about this for youth, just think about who are trusted messengers you can engage, whether youth or others they respect in the music industry, whoever it might be, spiritual leaders, mentors, who can share the resources and also know that not everyone's going to see a mental health professional who's at risk for suicide. So can we give just enough to the youth around so they can help each other? And what would that look like for each other? Can we all say we're all going to do one thing to support our hope, even if it's hope for the next 5 minutes? So I'll pause there. I think maybe actually I might move to Lilita, who I think is who I'm supposed to, who's going to share some activities here and some resources.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So we wanted to also leave you with some practical exercises. So here is the first out of a series of several, butterfly breathing. And I'm going to pause and just cross-check with Heidi and Jen that we'll just park these in the resource list and come back to the practice another time. Okay. Yeah, so the 3 steps. Next slide, please. This is also a resource I wanted to share with all of you. This is a children's book that I wrote and published about 10 years ago. And when the war started in Ukraine, I wanted to do something. And I felt very, very powerless. And I am from a lineage, my parents and grandparents fled the Baltic states, Latvia, during World War II. And I thought, wow, the one thing that I can do for kids and teens in Ukraine right now is create an animated version of in Ukrainian for kids that may have that access to Wi-Fi. And so it's a free resource on YouTube, and it teaches 7 regulation skills. So color breathing, number breathing. I encourage all of you to view it and also share it with any children, especially. The book is written for everyone ages 3 to 100, but it's really, really most targeted for kids as young as 3 and as old as 9 or 10. Next slide, please. And so I'll just very quickly highlight some final additional practices. Belly breathing. So placing your hand on the belly and one on your heart and taking some soft and gentle breaths. Next slide, please. Finger breathing, going through and tracing. And as you trace up, inhale, pause, trace down, and exhale. Next slide, please. And finally, the breathing ball. So these are all techniques you can use for yourselves and also pass them on to your kid and teen clients, family members, members of your community, holding an imaginary ball. And as you breathe in, making that ball expand. And as you breathe out, making it contract. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lilith, would you like me to try to drop the chat for the bye-bye butterflies into the chat?
That would be lovely. Greg, just so you know, there are 4 versions on YouTube: English, Ukrainian, Polish, and Latvian. So if you could just link the Ukrainian one, that would be wonderful.
Hopefully this works. I've taken it from the slide itself. If that was the embedded link on the slide, then that's what I'm sharing. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My intention is for it to reach all of the Ukrainian children and teenagers and adults for which the information would be helpful.
We do have some time left. Thank you. Heidi, Jen, and Lilith. Do we have any questions? I know that we did get some questions in the chat. One was, what is the line between self-aggression and suicide? And Heidi, you said that this was a great question and we would talk about this. What are your thoughts about that question?
Jen, I'm going to let you start if you don't mind, and I'm going to
Yeah, the short version is intent, right? So am I intending to die, even if it's not that much aggression, then it's a suicidal thought or a suicidal behavior if I'm hurting myself. But some people hurt themselves to relieve pain, but don't want to die. They're both very important because anyone who's hurting themselves is actually building the capacity to hurt themselves more and more and more, which puts you at greater risk for dying by suicide. But the difference would be one person doing self-aggression might be doing so to harm themselves, not to die. Person who's at risk for suicide would want to die or have the goal of killing themselves. Heidi?
Perfect. I have nothing to expand on that. It is all about intent. And just to reiterate, I know we ran out of time. There was so much we tried to pack in. We are going to send you all a document with these interventions that Lilita wasn't able to go through, with a little bit more explanation, and happy to send anything else we can. So please let us know what might be useful on these topics. We'll send some publications in terms of the Columbia screen, to that previous request, of it being used with military populations. Any other, I know there were some questions in the chat and probably more that we haven't seen a translation for, but we are happy to answer all those, you know.
There were a lot of organizational questions, and I tried to cover those. So out of the content questions, I think Greg was keeping an eye on those and translating and putting it up for discussion. So about the aggressive behavior, that was one of those. I will make sure that all the materials that you are going to send will be in the same folder with the recording, and also we can share the recording with you. Maybe you will share it with, you would want to share it with anyone else, maybe with other Ukrainian or other groups of people that might benefit from this information. And I just want to translate that something from the chat, that there are a lot of thanks for the practicality of the material that you were sharing with us, for the applicable exercises and the approaches. So really grateful for that, and just want you to know that there are a lot of those questions in the chat as I'm talking right now. And they are being added on.
May I have permission to ask one thing while we finish our talking? I would love it if everybody could share in their chat their one thing they go to for hope with each other. So I would love that to help us wrap while we finish some other of the formalities.
That is a great suggestion. I believe that we will have some latency of people's answering because of the translation, but I can start with my go-to help right away. This is my friend's dogs. She has 3 dogs, and whenever I feel, and she lives outside of the city, and whenever I feel sad or lacking something, and just I go to her place and I cuddle with the dogs. So animals are great support for me. Unfortunately, I don't have my own. Okay, so let me quickly check on the Ukrainian channel with the folks. How are they doing? Отже, колеги, якщо можете, хто з вас зараз має таку можливість, будь ласка, залиште у чаті англійською, українською, неважливо, річ, яка у вас викликає надію, та, щоб, знову ж таки, ці методи отримання надії могли множитися між нами всіма, і також ми могли показати нашим тренерам сьогодні, що ми засвоїли урок і серйозно ставимося до домашніх завдань і да, такого самоспівчуття, да, ось цих простих таких практик самопідтримки. And as we have reached basically the end of today's seminar, so we will also have some dogs in the smiles of children in the chat, things instilling hope. Some of them are in English, as you can see. I want to say thank you to all the basically to everybody present today. Apologize for the difficulties that we had, but we are very resilient, and none of the difficulties will stop us from delivering the training. So thank you very much for your kind presentation and kind both in terms of how generous you were with sharing the materials with us, and how kind you were in really getting like speaking to our hearts. I really felt that, and I'm sure that all of the people today did so as well. We are very grateful and looking forward to any possible future collaborations. Always glad to have people in our NPA family sharing and talking about important things, and just want you to know that these lectures that we have been organizing for over 2 years have become not only the source of like expanding professional knowledge, but also the support network of people, seeing each other, seeing the faces, feeling the support, and this is a great I think that also is one of for me, that is definitely one of the hope instilling things as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And last thing from our side is you all, you have to know that we are with you as fellow mental health clinicians, and are, honestly just humbled by what you're doing for your country right now. So please know we are with you, and we are here to do whatever we can to support you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I will briefly switch to the Ukrainian channel. We can stop the recording now.